Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'm bringing you an interview with Nina Gantz, director of the Oscar-nominated short film Wander to Wonder. Before I jump into the interview, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Nina Gantz is a Dutch animation director based in Brighton who graduated from the National Film and Television School, where she created the animated short film Edmond, which went on to win a BAFTA and the Sundance Award for Best Animated Short. Her most recent short film, Wander to Wonder, was nominated for an Oscar at the 2025 Academy Awards and earned her a second BAFTA, the Best Animated Short Award at South by Southwest, a BIFA Award, and an Annie Award. Nina is currently developing 2 feature-length films, and she joins me on the podcast to talk about Wander to Wonder. Nina, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I really loved your film, Wander to Wonder. I enjoyed the blend of the live action that you used with the stop-motion animation throughout. Tell me a little bit about where the inspiration for this story came from.
It's always quite a difficult question for me because I worked on film for so long and it had such a prolonged kind of development period, like 8 years. So you can imagine it's gone through many phases. But the first thing that sparked my attention or sparked my love was the love I have for the films of Ray Harryhausen. I don't know if you know of his films. So
Yep.
based in the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans, and it's just wonderful to see the mix of stop motion and live action done in such a amazing way. But you see the technique when you look at them, but it's still very convincingly, I think, even
Yeah.
if you look at them. Yeah, so I basically wanted to make something with live action and stop motion together. And then I was writing the first script with a friend of mine, Simon Cartwright, and we were looking for places where this kind of naturally happens, this mix of the two. And it's in kids TV shows, these old kids TV shows where you have a TV presenter that acts together with puppets. So that's where we went. And what we found quite interesting is when you look at these kids TV shows that you used to love, you must have them yourself.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Won't You Be My Neighbor? Or
Yeah, Sesame Street, Captain Kangaroo. Yeah, they have them everywhere.
yeah. So you have some really brilliant ones in the UK too, and in the Netherlands where I come from. And when you look at them as a grown-up, you experience them in such a different way. And there's this other layer to it where you're like, but who is in that suit? And what's going on? Like a little bit with the Teletubbies. And that kind of contrast that really interested us. And that's what we wanted to do something with that contrast, the really sweet and innocent and the darkness that could be behind it potentially. So you can imagine we came up with multiple scenarios in previous versions. The Uncle Gilly character was very much alive and was keeping them captive in the studio. But eventually, when I took over the project on my own and Simon went on to he went on to write his own script, I killed the Uncle Gilly character off. And it was much more about how these little humans needed to move on after such a seismic event. And that was something that I was experiencing at the same time of writing that new version. So there became like a bit of a personal layer into it, which is, still told in an absurd kind of way, obviously.
Yeah, and you mentioned, it's that kind of darker side of things. That kids TV show. What's the darker side behind that? And this is obviously a much darker film than I think what a lot of people in mainstream culture would think of when they think of an animated film. Why do you feel like it's important to expand animation beyond just kind of the family 90-minute computer animated studio films that often get most attention?
I just think animation is just another way of storytelling. I never saw it as this genre for kids. Actually, I only started to work in animation when I saw a Jan Swankmajer film for the first time, Dimensions of Dialogue, and I understood that animation wasn't just for kids, and I could tell my kind of stories in animation too. And I think it's still a lot in people's minds that it's for family, but yeah, for me it's just another technique, and in some ways it's another layer of storytelling. This is what I love so much about animation. You can tell maybe some uh, slightly more difficult stories, or maybe some more gruesome stories as well, because there is this layer of technique that you can use in your benefit. For instance, in my film Edmond, the first my first film that you also spoke about, it's about a cannibal out of love. So there's someone who wants to eat the people he loves, but really just because he loves them so much and he wants to become one. And I desperately didn't want this character to be kind of horrible and gruesome. And at some point, he bites someone's ear off. But because the blood that comes out of the ear is all made of wool, it's way more, you can digest this more easily as
Yeah,
a
yeah,
viewer. You can kind of, so that it can help you in many ways.
yeah. I think that that's a really cool way of looking at that. Now, in terms of your characters in this film, I loved how, I mean, how individual they are. Their personalities come through even in just the short runtime that the film has. How did you go about creating those really memorable characters? Which I think I see a couple of them up on the shelf behind your shoulder there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, there's all three of them there. So when we started out, me and Simon started off writing, we wanted to talk about, we wanted to approach it like a family drama, more so than, oh, this is a film about little people that live in a big world and how did they get there, and and what's, are there more or something. We wanted to really talk about this family drama, and that was our interest. And so we felt like they all needed to be very different from each other, like siblings can be. That was a really big thing that really we started off with, and they stayed the same throughout all these 8 years. So this is something I was clinging on to. Yeah, so Mary is trying to keep on making the show and, keep everything going, and clinging on to the past in some kind of way. Fumbleton is the Shakespearean character who now, after the master has died, finally can show off his skills as a serious Shakespearean actor. So he's continuously doing Shakespeare and also undermining Mary, who wants to just keep on with the show, but he kind of knows that no one's watching anymore. So
Yeah.
there's this really good conflict going on there. And then you've got Billy Budd, who's kind of in between and is maybe a little bit, it feels a bit like their kid, but it's probably another sibling. But in previous version, he was actually put in a microwave on time. And so he kind of stayed a little bit simpler. How
Yeah.
do you say? Yeah, just not so much. He's mostly content, which is great actually. In the situation he's in.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, obviously it is stop motion. You're dealing with puppets and created backgrounds, but I think you did a really good job of making everything look like it was part of this real worlds that they were inhabiting. What were some of the biggest challenges in creating whatever elements you had? You really kind of struggled with it if there were any coming up with those.
Well, it was that realistic thing where I felt they needed to fit, these characters needed to fit with this live action character, but they still, I didn't want to make them too real. Like I wanted to make them stop motion, like Ray Harryhausen did. So there was this, but they still needed to feel like they are a part of the same world. And this was very tricky because if I wanted them really realistic, I could have just done CG, or maybe actually filmed some actors and shrunken them, or and then by making them stop motion, I think there's this translation that already happens where you feel the human touch in every frame. And I had to go into 3D printing technique for the
Mhm.
faces, where you replace a face every frame with a different mouth shape. And I also made sure that I didn't have too many of them, so there was still they still kind of popped in some ways to make them less human. Because when I was sculpting the character, so I sculpted them in clay first to keep that kind of my signature. I had some help from someone to make them a little bit more realistic, but I and then I scanned them with a 3D scanner, and those were put into a 3D program, and we and made smaller, and then we could print them out. So there was a whole process to make it the way they are, but I think the skill of it was a huge challenge because we were working with real sets, real props. Normally for animation you make them much smaller, and this is how you can, keep a handle on like the scale. And now they were so big that you can imagine the puppets had to be of a certain size. They couldn't be that big because normally an animation puppet is like this tall, so 28 centimeters, 30 centimeters maybe,
Okay.
and mine were 20. And that just in a face, if you have a realistic proportions, the eyelids, for
Yeah,
instance,
it's just
were
so small.
incredibly small, and they were just the hardest thing to make. Like, I just never thought that the eyelids were gonna be a problem.
Right.
I was, "Oh, surely we can just fabricate some eyelids," but they have to fit exactly and stand up to big close-up shots on a big screen later on, so
Right.
they need to fit. Yeah, and they would just jump off the puppets like fleas, when you would put them on with a little, tweezer,
Uh-huh.
they would jump up. And they were so hard to make that after every day of the shoot, we would have to go on our hands and knees to try and find these tiny eyelids in between, obviously, a very, dirty studio floor, so
Yeah, for sure. I never would have expected eyelids would be the hardest thing, but that sounds like that was a tough one.
yeah.
And one of the other big things that I thought contributed to the realism and the effectiveness was all of the sounds throughout. You've got, as they're watching the videotapes, the old episodes of their show, there's the videotape sounds, the TV sounds, there's the flies buzzing around. What went into creating some of those sounds throughout the film that we get to hear?
I had a really wonderful sound designer from France on this, Loic Burkhardt. And he actually bought an old VHS, the one that was almost the one like that's in the film. So he went quite meta on it. And he actually recorded all these sounds himself, which is really brilliant. And he had many fly sounds as well. So he layered them with all flies sound differently, clearly. So so he had layered them, and he had so many. I think that's what made it so realistic, that he had some, like, it was such a layered process for him, and he took it really to another level. I feel that was really wonderful to see, but also tricky because you feel when it's not realistic, and with some films you can get away with it, and this film just not.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions not specifically related to the film, but before I move on, is there anything you want to touch on about Wander to Wonder?
No, no, I think you asked wonderful questions.
Well, this might be the hardest question I asked, but if you had to pick your top three films of all time, what would they be?
I read that question, and then I thought, "That's evil."
I get that a
Yeah,
lot.
that is literally what I spend most my days wondering. So that's impossible. So I actually thought, "You know what? I'm not gonna think about which ones, and I'll just say some." So, well, I'll say Jan Swankmajer, Dimensions of Dialogue, which is the film that made me want to go into animation. So that's always a good one. Then I would say Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And also because of his brilliant use of tricks, camera tricks, and then the storytelling, and a lot of the things that I love. And then the third one is the hardest one because then you've got like a hot list of 100 films to choose from.
Only pick one.
I thought if I say them really quickly, maybe I can. You know what? I'll say another animated film because maybe some people won't ever see those otherwise, and it's the Eagleman Stag by Mikey, please. A really brilliant short animated film. But I've got many more, so I should start like a little list. And yeah, but yeah, that's a difficult question
Yeah, it
ever.
is. Well, do you have any books that you could recommend that you've read recently or anything that you really enjoy? They could be fiction or nonfiction and don't have to be related to movies.
Okay. Well, actually, Mikey Please, who I just mentioned, who did the Eagleman Stag, also just made this book. I literally have it on my desk here because I'm reading it. And it's called The Expanded Earth, and it's also about miniature people. So I was really interested in reading that anyway. And also, he's a brilliant illustrator. So there's beautiful illustrations in it, and I'm also reading George Saunders' Pastoralia, which I really love. So I'm just at the first chapter, but
Wonderful. We'll put some links to those so people can check them out. And who else from the world of film should I have on the podcast as a guest?
I really love the work of a Dutch director called Alex van Warmerdam. And he is also one of my favorite film directors. He made some fantastic films. If you've never seen them, the Last Days of Emma Blanc and The Northerners, you will maybe find out. So Alex van Warmerdam, or just ask Mikey, please. I don't know if you've asked him before.
I have not. That's another good one.
Yeah. Or Simon Cartwright, who I wrote Wanted to Wonder with as well. So yeah, these are three wonderful directors.
Perfect. Well, we'll see if we can reach out to them, see if we can get a hold of any of them. And lastly, before we wrap things up, do you have any, well, I mentioned at the top, do you have a couple other projects that you're working on, but anything that you can tell us about, and also where folks can follow you on social media or check you out online?
Yeah, I'm working on 2 feature films at the moment that I've been developing for a while, and one of them is a family film, and all set in Amsterdam, completely stop motion, and it's a homage to the pigeons of Amsterdam. So that's very different from Wonder to Wonder.
Yeah.
But then I'm also making a film with the same producers of Wonder to Wonder that is in a similar with a similar vibe of that film. So it's live action and stop motion, and it's very much for adults. So that is all, and that's actually set on a cruise ship, and it's because I lived on a cruise ship for a little bit when I was like 6. So that comes from there. But yeah, it follows like it's kind of also an absurd story, and it follows the humans, the animals, but also other life forms on board. So it's gonna be a strange. Yeah.
Very cool. And where can people follow you online?
Just on my Instagram. I'm a little bit after the Oscar race. I have pulled back a bit, given myself a little break, but I'll be back at some point.
Nina, thank you so much for your time today. I really loved the film and appreciated hearing some of the stories about what went into creating it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Thank you again to my guest today, Nina Gantz. Her film, Wander to Wonder, was among the nominees in the Best Animated Short Film category at the 97th Academy Awards. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eaterberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eaterberg. If you want more movie coverage, check out the Oscar Project online at theoscarproject.substack.com. I'll be back on Friday with Maria Banson to discuss the 1929 film Coquette, and next Tuesday I'll have an interview with another guest from the world of film. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.